major story is about an election coming up. It's a mayoral election, and the mayor, just a week before the election, gets murdered, and it's in a very, very public manner, by someone who you then find out is essentially a serial killer who's killing pretty much every prominent member of Gotham society. And then Batman comes into it initially because he's not the kind of a major figure in Gotham at this point, and his only real ally is Gordon, and Gordon's kind of bringing him in as an unorthodox element of the investigation. This is by far the most major adversary he's come across, and also the Riddler is addressing everything directly to Batman, so that's really why he's becoming involved in the investigation, the major reason. I'd never been interested in a superhero movie. I'd never been in the kind of, it'd never been in my periphery at all. And for some reason, Batman just always stood out as a kind of very special, separate entity. It's always the way the movies have been made, and where the character sits in the kind of cultural lexicon, it always feels very individual, and it kind of holds a lot of totemic importance. I think the things that make the performance hard were also what make it appealing. I mean, there's the legacy of people who played it and the directors who worked on it. It's kind of, it both kind of increases the pressure on you, but shows that there are lots of different angles to the character. And it's almost like the more people reinterpret it, it feels like the space to reinvent it gets smaller, but I think it actually just gets more specific, and it's kind of, I find that really fun, to try and find just a new way of doing something when, you know, a lot of your heroes have played it before, and try and find a new angle on it.
What's black and blue and dead all over?
He doesn't necessarily know that he's going to save the day, and I think that's a kind of important differentiation of this Batman. I think he doesn't know if being Batman is going to work or do anything. He's just compelled to do it more than thinking like, oh, I've made a plan, I'm going to be Batman, and this is what's going to happen afterwards. He doesn't know, but he knows that there is no other option. But basically the options are kind of death or being Batman, and like there's a kind of hopeless, I don't know if it's hopelessness, but there's a desperation to it, which is a little bit different.
The hell are you supposed to be?
I'm vengeance.
You realize quite quickly there's benefits of you put on the suit and you immediately feel incredibly powerful. And, you know, 10 times the size, there's something which yeah, there's obvious benefits to it. But then 10 minutes later, you realize if I even slightly exert myself, I'm pouring sweat. And also just to try and figure out how to project a performance through a mask, basically. It's kind of, you realize pretty quickly that this is way harder than a normal part, and has its own very, very specific set of complications and kind of, yeah, things you have to work out. But also you kind of, it's interesting, it's kind of, you're very, very reliant on the lighting, very reliant on the director, because you have to learn, really, you have a new face, basically. And anything which you could rely on before in terms of performance is just suddenly out the window, and you have to just relearn an entirely different language, which is scary at first, because you feel like you're pushing so hard against the suit, and like nothing's coming through, and then you suddenly realize you can just do tiny little movements, and the iconography of the cowl just can be so much more impactful than, you know, anything you could really do with your face in a lot of ways.
Let's play a game, just me and you. Any of this mean anything to you?
In 2019, and I literally was traveling with stacks of Batman comics. I mean, it was like an entire suitcase filled, and I think I must have read just so many, but I didn't realize you could get them on an iPad. I should have thought about that before. You're living in a world where there's so many different things competing for your attention, and so many different movies and even franchises competing for your attention. And when you know that there's a fan base that's so invested in the story and that really care, there's so many elements where you're just, you know, you're trying to just make the movie work when you're on a day-to-day basis. But just occasionally you just catch a glimpse of yourself in a reflection or something with the profile and the cowl on, or you see like a bit of playback or something, and it's just incredibly surreal sometimes. And you're like, wait, I'm actually doing this. Like, it's fun then. There's always this argument with people who are into Batman where people are always asking, is the real Bruce Wayne, is his real self Batman or Bruce Wayne? And I was always kind of interested in that. Things about alter ego and identity and stuff. If he puts on this suit and he believes in it so much, he believes it kind of elevates him as a creature. Like when he puts on a bat suit, he isn't Bruce, he's Batman. And as Batman, you have heightened sensory abilities. And like, it's just, you've convinced yourself of it, and it is transformative to Bruce. And so I was trying to kind of do that. And, you know, when you walk into a crime scene or something, there's an element of being sort of like a savant or a witch doctor or something, and you just have heightened senses, but specifically because you put the suit on. And so I thought that would, I was trying to put that into the movement where it's more, you're like a wraith or something like that, rather than, you know, just a kind of brutal, ruthless fighter.
I got you! I got you! Take that, you friggin' psycho! I got you!
I was trying to think of how to describe his style the other day, and it's sort of like watching a conductor of like a really huge orchestra, and where he can, like, you can see, and he'll kind of get hyper focused on tiny little actions, but he seems to be able to keep the entire story in a macro view in his mind the entire time. And so when you're being like, I just don't really understand how he does it. I mean, there's kind of, he'll be looking at the tiniest little thing of like how you put an object down on the table, and you can see that he's trying that, the way you do that movement is moving the entire movie in his head, which, yeah, I don't understand how we have a brain which can kind of keep that in the entire time. Also, to watch him when he was directing basically 3 units at the same time, I mean, it's just like, you really trust it. You can feel how much he cares about it. He's never rushed. Like, you can feel like, you know, he'll only move on when he feels like he's got what he needs for the movie. And yeah, and I kind of isn't afraid to stray a little bit from kind of Batman canon a bit. I mean, there's definitely made some pretty bold stylistic choices, but also just like story choices as well. I mean, there's kind of things which I'm not sure if even some of the major plot points or even in the comics or anything, they're just wholly original. which is fun. That's exciting. It's exciting to see what the fans will, how they'll interpret it, and how it will also fit into the kind of Batman canon.
You're part of this too. How am I part of this? You'll see.
It's just another part of that, so the handmade nature of everything in this Batman. Like, I like that you can see the construction. It's not like it's alien technology or like repurposed super high-tech military technology. Like, he's built it himself in his basement basically, and it's just, and you can kind of see that. I mean, and you can see him tinkering away at it. Yeah, there's something that Batman's always, I think, quite an accessible superhero, even though he's a billionaire or whatever. There's something, the fact that he's just a guy, I think appeals to a lot of people. And when you kind of get closer and closer to that, and you see that even the Batmobile looks like something he's built himself, and that, you know, if you had the perseverance and the cash, you could build yourself as well. I think it's kind of appealing.
小铃铛就不会错过任何精彩内容，随时上架。我们下回再见。